Wide desert stretched beneath a fading autumn sun, breathing with long shadows and winds that carried the scent of dry sage and forgotten history. The earth felt as though it held unsaid stories, waiting for someone with quiet eyes to listen. Dust whispered around abandoned fence posts, and a lone shack leaned into a crooked horizon, its windows clouded by time. Everything looked still, but it was not lifeless. It felt paused, as if holding its breath before revealing something fragile. Elias Ward arrived just after sundown, riding an old pickup that coughed tired smoke. He was a cowboy by habit rather than ambition, shaped by years of ranching, silence, and the heavy ache of widowhood. People in town barely remembered when he smiled last. His grief was not violent. It moved slowly inside him, the way drought settles into soil until it forgets what rain feels like. He had spent months drifting without direction, not running from life, but drifting so lightly that no one could tell where his heart ended and the horizon began. He came to this place because it was cheap, and because the town clerk called it worthless. $15 for 30 dry acres, no running water, no grazing potential, no history except the memory of abandonment. The clerk warned him that nothing ever grew there. Elias did not argue. He simply nodded, almost relieved not to be surrounded by expectation. When the papers exchanged hands, the clerk shook his head and muttered that Elias would get bored by morning, then drive away and forget he ever signed anything. Elias said nothing. It felt good to own even a broken corner of earth, something unclaimed by anyone else. The shack on his new land had a roof nearly split down the middle, letting twilight pour in like a spilled blessing. Elias opened the rickety door as gently as one approaches a sleeping relative. The place smelled of dust, rusted tools, and rain long gone. There were spiderwebs in the corners, abandoned nails on the windowsill, and one overturned chair that seemed to sigh whenever wind pressed through. He swept debris into piles, fixing loose boards with spare nails. The land did not need to be glamorous. It only needed to feel inhabited again. As he worked, he felt a soft calm rise within him, the kind that comes when someone no longer must measure their worth. Elias had lived his whole life trying to fix other people's spaces, but he had never lived in a space where silence felt kind. When the last streak of daylight faded, Elias lit a lantern and checked the fence line for gaps. Coyotes roamed at night, and though he had no animals of his own, he understood that land had memory and should be treated with respect, even if it had nothing to offer. Halfway through the inspection, he paused. There was movement beyond the corral, so faint it might have been wind brushing dead branches. Yet something about it felt intentional, like a pulse. He lifted the lantern higher and held his breath. The desert offered many sounds, rustling yucca, restless rabbits, sighing soil. But the sound reaching his ears was different. It was laborious, like a slow scraping or dragging, carrying a quiet desperation that no wild creature would willingly make. Elias stepped closer, boots crunching softly as though trying not to disturb the night. Behind a curtain of wild mesquite, Elias discovered a sight that rooted him in place. A horse stood tied to a leaning post, nearly invisible beneath the darkness. Its ribs pressed sharply against skin, its coat dull and patchy as if hunger had been sculpting it for months. The animal swayed like a ghost, trying to remember how to remain solid. Elias could not understand how it even stood. Whoever tied it there had long forgotten it, or perhaps had never intended for it to survive. The horse lifted its head slowly, as though the motion required more strength than it possessed. Its eyes were sunken but alert, not begging, only acknowledging that someone had finally arrived. Elias felt the lantern shake in his hands. He recognized not the body, but the expression, that quiet endurance of beings who had been wounded without witness, who learned to survive by expecting nothing from the world. He approached with small, deliberate steps, letting silence communicate what words could not. The horse flinched when the lantern came too close, expecting pain. Elias lowered the light, whispering without sound, offering patience rather than demand. He could see cuts on its legs where it had rubbed against the rope, trying to step away from suffering it could not escape. Each wound was shallow yet meaningful, evidence of a creature fighting even when surrender would have been easier. Elias knelt and laid a hand near the knot instead of on the horse. He understood that healing did not begin with touch, it began with permission. Minutes passed quietly, and then the horse leaned ever so slightly toward the lantern's glow, as if deciding that hope was not yet a dangerous idea. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a pocket-knife. The blade caught a sliver of moonlight as he slid it beneath the rope. He paused again, looking into the horse's tired eyes, silently promising that he would not walk away. Then he cut the rope. The horse stumbled forward, free but confused. It did not run. It simply breathed, long and shaky, like an exile stepping back into the world. Elias stood beside it, steady as a fence post in storm wind. The horse blinked once, a fragile acknowledgment that freedom could be trusted. For a moment, man and animal simply existed in shared stillness, neither trying to understand the other but honoring the truth that survival had brought them together. Elias whispered softly that he would stay. And somewhere in the night, destiny exhaled, no longer waiting. The future had only begun for them. The morning after freeing the horse felt strangely ceremonial, as if the land itself approved of the fragile promise made under starlight. Elias woke before sunrise and carried a bucket of clean water to the corral. The horse stood where it had collapsed the night before, legs unsteady but eyes alert, as though relief had replaced fear. Elias set the bucket down gently and stepped back. The horse sniffed the rim, then drank with trembling urgency, each swallow sounding like gratitude. Elias exhaled in quiet awe, sensing the beginning of something neither of them understood yet. He returned with hay purchased from town, though it cost more than he preferred to spend. Money felt less important than life. The horse approached slowly, chewing each strand as though rediscovering the logic of nourishment. Elias sat on the dirt a few feet away, letting the desert breathe between them. He noticed hunger was not the horse's only wound. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. Yet beneath that weariness, Elias sensed a resilience that stirred an unfamiliar tenderness inside him. Over the following days, Elias fed and watered her with steady rhythm, learning small details. She disliked sudden movement, favored her right leg when lying down, and fell asleep only after listening for danger. Elias brushed her gently, removing burrs tangled in her mane, and murmured encouragement without expecting comprehension. Healing happened inch by inch, like dawn creeping across the horizon. Elias found comfort in these slow rituals, realizing that offering kindness soothed his loneliness as much as it mended her body. Word traveled quietly through the nearby town that Elias was caring for an abandoned horse on worthless land. Some people scoffed, assuming he was wasting his time, but curiosity eventually outweighed skepticism. One afternoon, a little boy rode his bicycle to the fence, peeking shyly between slats. Elias waved him closer, though he maintained a respectful distance from the horse. The child stared with wide eyes, surprised that such a thin creature could still stand. Elias noticed how the boy's expression softened when the horse nuzzled the edge of his jacket, searching for crumbs she could not find. The boy returned the next day with an apple in his pocket, and the horse accepted it gently, chewing with deliberate joy. Soon, 2 other children arrived, followed by their mothers, and a retired veteran who often wandered into town for conversation he rarely received. Elias did not advertise anything, yet the land became a gathering place for unspoken vulnerability. The horse helped strangers settle into stillness, as if her survival reminded everyone that healing was not loud or impressive, it was persistent. As the horse regained strength, she began walking short distances across the corral, rediscovering balance and curiosity. Elias named her Miracle after the 5th week, when she lifted her head toward sunrise and snorted at the air like someone reclaiming identity. The name felt inevitable rather than poetic. Miracle did not resist it. She simply accepted the sound, as though destiny had allowed her to wear it. Elias whispered her name often, not for dramatic effect but to remind himself that life occasionally returned from places where it had been forgotten. Miracle's presence changed the atmosphere around the shack. The veteran who visited carried lumber one morning, offering to repair the broken corral gate. Elias hesitated, unsure whether he deserved help, but the man insisted that work was healing when done for something innocent. Together, they hammered boards into alignment, exchanging few words yet building companionship. Children swept the dusty path leading to the corral, chasing each other between chores. One widow brought blankets she had sewn by hand, explaining that softness mattered as much as safety. Elias accepted everything with humble bewilderment. He began noticing emotional currents within the visitors. Teenagers who struggled with anger found calm while brushing Miracle's coat. A mother grieving her husband sat beneath a mesquite tree, listening to Miracle breathe, and left lighter than when she arrived. The ranch, though unpolished, provided space for people to set down burdens without explanation. No rules governed the place. Everyone instinctively understood that silence was sacred. Miracle became the emotional center, absorbing sadness without judgment, returning serenity without effort. Elias did not plan a sanctuary or seek recognition. He simply showed up each day, cleaning hooves, checking wounds, and learning the language of patience. Miracle trusted him enough to rest her head against his chest, eyes half closed as though surrender felt safe again. Elias felt his heart stretch in unexpected ways, no longer trapped in grief but shaped by connection. The land once labeled worthless revealed itself as fertile ground for second chances. Elias began journaling, capturing each moment with reverent detail so he would never forget the transformation unfolding in slow motion. Sometimes, at sunset, Elias sat near Miracle and drank coffee while dew settled over the desert. He watched visitors lean against the fence, their silhouettes softened by golden light. It amazed him that a starving horse tied to a forgotten post had awakened such tenderness inside an ordinary community. Elias realized that trauma did not erase dignity, it only hid it until someone cared enough to look closely. Miracle's recovery taught him that the world changed whenever one creature trusted another again. Healing no longer felt abstract, it felt real, breathing, and beautifully personal. One evening, the sun dipped low and painted the corral in honeyed light. Elias stood beside Miracle, listening to distant laughter from children skipping rocks along a dry wash. She nudged his shoulder and snorted softly, as if wanting him to notice something beyond the fence. Elias turned toward the horizon and saw a figure approaching slowly, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. The silhouette grew clearer with each step, revealing a teenage girl with tear-reddened cheeks and uncertainty in her posture. She reached the gate and whispered that she had heard about Miracle and needed help, though she did not know how to ask for it. Elias felt the air still. Something deeper was arriving, and he sensed the story was only beginning. The healing ranch grew without announcements or blueprints, spreading like roots beneath cracked soil. People arrived quietly, drawn by whispers that something gentle lived beyond the dry road. Elias built shaded stalls from scrap wood, added water troughs with the help of neighbors, and expanded Miracle's corral into a wide paddock where she could stretch her legs without fear. Each improvement felt like restoring dignity to the land, and each act of repair softened Elias's grief until it no longer ruled his spirit. He felt a steady gratitude blooming where loneliness used to sit. Miracle became the centerpiece of a wordless ministry. She greeted visitors with calmness that seemed impossible to explain. Her eyes, once dull and defeated, now shimmered with awareness, as if she recognized every soul carrying unspoken pain. Elias often watched her guide people toward vulnerability without force. Parents brought anxious children whose nights were filled with nightmares, and Miracle stood beside them until shaking turned into stillness. Veterans suffering from sleepless memories brushed her mane and leaned against her neck, finding rest where medication had failed. There was no doctrine carved into the ranch gates. The only teaching was presence. The land felt alive with gratitude. One afternoon, the teenage girl who had approached the corral weeks earlier returned with a younger brother. Their clothes were worn, their expressions heavy with worry. Elias greeted them without asking questions and invited them to sit beneath the mesquite tree. Miracle stepped closer, inspecting them with soft curiosity. The boy's face tightened with unease, but Miracle lowered her head and waited patiently. The girl explained in a shy voice that her brother had stopped speaking after a house fire that had stolen their parents. Elias listened without interruption. Mourning held its own language, and he never hurried grief. The boy reached out tentatively, brushing Miracle's cheek with hesitant fingers. The horse closed her eyes, leaning into the touch with gentle insistence. The boy's lips trembled, and tears slid down without sound. Elias felt a warm ache rise in his chest. Healing could not be staged, it revealed itself slowly, as if time needed permission to soften. The boy did not speak that day, but his breathing steadied, and he fell asleep curled beside Miracle's legs, safe enough to surrender consciousness. Elias covered him with a quilt and whispered silent thanks. Weeks later, a local nurse brought a small group of children who struggled with loneliness after losing parents, siblings, or homes. Each child carried grief differently, but Miracle never flinched. She stood among them with the quiet elegance of an ancient tree, grounding their fragile emotions without absorbing despair. The children learned to groom her, braid flowers into her mane, and sing lullabies during the evenings when shadows stretched long. The land vibrated with a strange harmony, as if sorrow had been transformed into belonging. Elias expanded the ranch again, building a covered arena where horses rescued from other abandoned sites could begin their own recoveries. Volunteers joined him without being asked. Some donated feed, while others painted fences or dug irrigation lines. Elias accepted their generosity with humility, unsure how to repay anything except through steady devotion. He felt as though destiny had placed him exactly where he needed to stand. The ache of widowhood softened enough that memory became gratitude instead of torment. The boy who would not speak returned every weekend. He and Miracle formed an unspoken bond that grew deeper with each visit. Miracle allowed him to lie across her back, even before Elias believed she was strong enough to carry weight. The boy never pushed, he simply existed beside her, as if sharing breath restored his courage to feel again. Elias sensed a climax approaching but did not predict its shape. Healing often arrived without formal invitation. One late summer afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the ranch, hinting at the first rain the land had felt in months. The sky trembled with distant thunder. Families gathered under the arena roof, seeking shelter, while Miracle grazed near the corral with unbothered patience. The boy stood beside her, rain misting across his hair. Elias watched from the porch, heart steady but expectant. Something inside the boy's posture looked different, as if his spirit had finally unclenched. A crack of thunder rolled across the desert, loud enough to startle every child. The boy gasped, gripping Miracle's mane. Miracle remained still, offering calm instead of alarm. The ranch held its breath. The boy buried his face against her neck, trembling with memories he could not explain. Elias started toward them, but Miracle signaled for stillness, lifting one hoof lightly then grounding it with decisive intention. The boy inhaled slowly and whispered a word so fragile that the wind almost carried it away. Home. The entire arena fell silent. The nurse dropped to her knees, hands trembling. Elias felt tears flood his vision as the boy repeated the word, voice shaky but undeniably alive. Home, he said again, pressing his cheek against Miracle's shoulder. Miracle nickered softly, echoing understanding. The rain intensified, washing the dust from the corral as if cleansing history itself. Children cried, adults clung to one another, and Elias stood rooted in awe. Trauma had not defeated the boy. Love had coaxed language from silence. Word of the moment traveled across neighboring towns, reaching teachers, pastors, and families hungry for restoration. Within weeks, more parents brought children struggling with speech loss, emotional withdrawal, or anxiety after tragedy. Miracle welcomed each with unwavering tenderness. The ranch evolved into a sanctuary where brokenness was not fixed but held, where voices returned when fear no longer dominated breath. Elias finally understood that he was not building a place for horses. He was stewarding a refuge for souls seeking safety. Years passed with grace. Miracle aged with dignity, her coat now silvered around the muzzle, her steps slower but still sure. Elias honored her with affectionate care, recognizing that her healing ministry continued even in old age. The boy grew stronger, speaking with gentle confidence and helping younger children bond with Miracle and the other rescued horses. Elias sometimes watched them from the porch, coffee warming his hands, marveling at how grief had transformed into purpose. One golden evening, the boy approached Miracle with newly stitched reins and guided her toward the open field. Elias followed at a respectful distance, sensing an unspoken intention. The boy climbed lightly onto Miracle's back, sitting straight with quiet pride. Miracle lifted her head, acknowledging the past without fear. Elias felt his heart expand, knowing they were witnessing the fulfillment of hundreds of tiny prayers. Miracle stepped forward, carrying the boy into the horizon, both healed enough to share destiny. Elias whispered thanks to the desert sky, realizing the ranch had always been waiting for them. Hello horse lovers! Before leaving to the channel, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a future upload.